You've said it thousands of times, maybe tens of thousands. At the end of a prayer, at the end of a hymn, at the end of a church service where everyone bows their heads and the pastor's voice drops into that final solemn register. One word, 3 syllables, and everyone says it together like punctuation, like a full stop on communication with the divine. Amen. You were told it means so be it. A kind of cosmic confirmation, a seal on the envelope before you send it upward. Maybe you were told it comes from Hebrew. Maybe you never asked. Most people never ask. They just say it, over and over, for decades, without once questioning whether the word they're using to close every conversation with God is actually doing what they think it's doing. I stopped saying it. Not out of rebellion, not to be contrarian. I stopped because the more I dug into where that word actually comes from, not the Sunday school version, not the institutional answer, the more I realized that what the church handed you is a fraction of the story, a carefully trimmed fraction. Because amen doesn't just mean so be it. It never did. And the full picture of what that word points to, where it appears, what it was connected to before the councils and the canons and the burnings, that's what this episode is about. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. Let's start with what you were given. The standard etymology traces Amen to the Hebrew root Aleph Mem Nun, A-M-N, which carries a cluster of meanings: firm, reliable, trustworthy, established. When a biblical writer used it, they were invoking certainty, truth, something that holds, verily in older translations, truly. The King James Bible uses verily, verily, I say unto you, and that's the same root, amen. This is true, this is established, this stands. So far so good, that's not wrong. But it's also not the whole word, because amen shows up in contexts the church rarely discusses in Sunday sermons. It shows up with a capital letter, with a divine title, with attributes. And the deeper you go into ancient Egyptian religious tradition, which predates the Hebrew scriptures by thousands of years, the more you encounter a figure whose name is phonetically remarkably close to that word you've been saying at the end of every prayer. Amun. Sometimes spelled Amen. Sometimes Amun-Ra, the hidden one, the concealed one, the God whose nature was specifically described as that which cannot be seen, cannot be named, cannot be circumscribed. The ancient Egyptians didn't call him invisible because he was absent. They called him invisible because he was the ground beneath everything visible, the source that precedes form. Now, stay with me because this is where most people either lean in or dismiss it. I get that. When I first started pulling on this thread, I'll be honest, my first instinct was to write it off as coincidence, linguistic overlap, different cultures, different roots, different meanings. But the more I sat with the actual history, not the sanitized version, not the version that keeps two traditions neatly separated, the more the overlap became impossible to unsee. Here's what the historical record shows. The ancient Israelites spent approximately 400 years in Egypt. 400 years of cultural immersion, linguistic cross-pollination, and theological exchange. The idea that Hebrew religious vocabulary emerged from that 4 centuries of contact without absorbing anything from the surrounding culture is not serious history. It's institutional comfort. Scholars like Jan Assmann, who spent decades examining the contact zones between Egyptian and Israelite religious tradition, have documented the deep structural parallels between what the Egyptians understood about their hidden God and what the Hebrew tradition would later develop around its own conception of the divine. Not identical, not a direct copy, but unmistakably in conversation. And here's the part that started to crack something open for me. In Egyptian theology, Amun wasn't merely one god among many. After the New Kingdom period, roughly 1550 to 1070 BCE, Amun-Ra was elevated to a position that Egyptian theologians themselves described using language that sounds startlingly monotheistic. Invisible, unknowable. the one in whom all other gods exist as aspects, the self-created, the one who breathes life into all things. That's not polytheism dressed up. That's a sophisticated theological claim about the nature of ultimate reality. And the name for that ultimate reality was Amen, Amen, the hidden one. So when you say Amen at the end of a prayer, when the entire congregation exhales that word together, what word are you actually saying? What concept is sitting inside that syllable that nobody introduced you to? That's not a rhetorical gotcha. That's a genuine question worth sitting with. But here's what that version still leaves out. Because knowing the Egyptian connection to the word is interesting, it's historically significant, but it doesn't yet touch the deeper question, the one the Gnostic texts were actually wrestling with when they used this word and the theology behind it in ways that the later institutional church found threatening enough to suppress. The Nag Hammadi texts, discovered in 1945 in Upper Egypt, sealed in a jar, buried for roughly 1,600 years, use a specific term for the highest divine principle, the monad, the invisible spirit, the one who is. And the descriptions in those texts are precise and deliberate in ways that modern readers tend to underestimate. The Apocryphon of John opens with a description of the supreme divine that I've returned to more times than I can count. I spent an entire afternoon once just sitting with the opening cosmological passages, reading them slowly, then reading them again. Before we continue, there's something I want to place in your hands. We've gathered the forgotten texts, the ones the church sealed away for 17 centuries, into a single guide for those who feel the pull towards something deeper. Because whether we speak of the archons, the demiurge, or the divine spark, one truth remains. This knowledge was never meant to be lost. This is for anyone who senses there's more to this reality than we've been told, and who's ready to remember it. You'll find it in the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code right here. I'll give you a moment to do that. The text says, "The monad is a monarchy with nothing above it. It is pure light which no eye can behold." And then it does something unusual for an ancient religious text. It spends considerable time telling you what the monad is not. It is not finite. It is not deficient. It does not exist within time. It cannot be grasped by any concept because every concept is itself a limited thing, and the monad is precisely that which is not limited. Sound familiar? The hidden one, the concealed one, the one who precedes form. Amen. Now, here's where it gets cosmically significant, because the Gnostic texts weren't just doing abstract theology, they were making a claim about you, about your nature, about the relationship between the divine that is hidden and the human being standing in the world asking, "Where is God?" The trimorphic Protanoia, one of the most extraordinary texts in the Nag Hammadi collection, opens with a voice, a first-person divine voice that says, "I am the one who moves in every creature." I spent 3 hours one night just with that opening declaration, tracing how it unfolds across the text. The voice is described as hidden, primordial, dwelling within everything while remaining concealed from exterior perception. It doesn't announce itself from above, it speaks from within. This is the theological architecture that the later institutional church systematically dismantled. Not because it was philosophically incoherent. It wasn't. Not because it lacked textual grounding. It had abundant grounding. But because what it said about the relationship between human consciousness and divine reality made the entire structure of external religious mediation unnecessary. Let me be direct about that. If the divine is not above you but within you, if the hidden one isn't waiting in a celestial throne room for your prayers to arrive, but is instead the very ground of your own awareness, then you don't need a priest. You don't need a liturgy. You don't need an institution to broker your access. You need recognition. You need the interior turn. And you can't exactly put a collection plate in front of someone's internal awakening, just saying. Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyon, writing around 180 CE, didn't go after the Gnostic communities because he found their theology confused. He went after them because he found it dangerous. His treatise, the full title is Against Heresies, is essentially a 5-volume argument for why you should not trust your own direct experience of the divine, why you need the institutional structure, why the texts that described an interior divine presence were to be rejected, destroyed, and forgotten. When an institution spends 5 volumes arguing against a teaching, not engaging it philosophically, but trying to erase it from history, you're looking at something that threatened not bad theology, but institutional power. That's the tell. And the word Amen, that word sitting at the center of both the Egyptian theological tradition and the Gnostic understanding of the hidden divine, that word was domesticated, reduced, turned from a name, a concept, a cosmological claim, into a liturgical period at the end of a sentence, into punctuation. That reduction wasn't accidental. That's my one editorial interjection, and I'll move on. One viewer left a comment under my video, "I rewatched The Matrix after reading the Nag Hammadi. I can't unsee it now," that stopped me in my tracks. They wrote, "What if the most powerful things were hidden in the most obvious places, the places no one would think to look because everyone already thinks they know what's there?" I've been thinking about that comment ever since, because that's exactly what happened with Amen. It wasn't hidden by being erased. It was hidden by being overused, by being made so ordinary, so reflexive, so automatic, that no one would stop to examine it. You can't suppress a word that 1 billion people say every week, but you can hollow it out. You can drain it of its cosmological content and leave only the ritual shell. This is the mechanism the historian Elaine Pagels documents in the Gnostic Gospels, though she frames it differently. She traces how the emerging institutional church in the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE made a series of deliberate choices about which texts to canonize, which communities to legitimate, and which theological claims to suppress. The criteria weren't purely theological. They were structural. Teachings that required a mediating institution survived. Teachings that pointed to direct interior access to the divine were labeled heretical, and their textual foundations were destroyed wherever possible. The Nag Hammadi texts survived only because someone, we don't know who, sealed them in that jar sometime in the 4th century, likely around the time of the Nicene Council in 325 CE, when the institutional codification of orthodoxy accelerated sharply. Someone hid them, buried them in the Egyptian desert, and they stayed buried for 1,600 years. What did they hide inside that jar? Among other things, texts that describe the highest divine principle, the monad, the invisible spirit, the hidden one, in terms that unmistakably echo the Egyptian theological understanding of Amun, the concealed ground beneath all existence, the one who is within rather than above, the one whose name isn't an ending but a beginning. Here's the analogy that finally cracked it open for me. Imagine you have a compass, not a digital one, an old magnetic compass, the kind that points north because it's responding to a field that pervades everything around it, invisible and constant. Now imagine someone takes that compass and teaches generations of people that the needle is just a decoration, that the pointing is just a tradition, that you should hold the compass in your hand and say north at the end of every sentence, but never actually follow the needle. Never actually orient yourself by what the instrument is showing you. That's what happened to Amen. The word originally pointed somewhere. It pointed toward the hidden one, the concealed divine ground. Call it Amun, call it the monad, call it the invisible spirit of the Apocryphon of John. The names are different containers for the same claim. And that claim is this: the divine is not distant. The divine is not above. The divine is the hidden substrate of your own existence, closer than your breath, more interior than your thoughts, concealed not because it is absent, but because most of us have been trained to look only outward. When you say Amen and send your prayer outward and upward, you are doing something real. I don't dismiss that. The longing is real. The reach is real. But the Gnostic tradition, and I would argue the deeper current running beneath the Egyptian theology that gave us that word, min, was pointing in a different direction entirely. Not up, in. The Gospel of Philip, another text recovered at Nag Hammadi, makes this explicit in its own dense and layered way. It talks about names and their relationship to reality, about how the names we use for sacred things can either open us toward what they point to or become substitutes for the actual encounter. The Gnostic worry wasn't that people were saying the wrong words. The worry was that saying the words had replaced the experience the words were originally designed to gesture toward. Amen was a gesture toward the hidden one, toward the concealed divine ground that the Egyptians called Amun, that the Gnostics called the monad, that the Apocryphon of John describes as the light no eye can behold. And somewhere in 2,000 years of liturgical repetition, the gesture became a habit. The compass needle became a decoration. The name of the hidden one became a way to signal that you're done talking. So let's slow down here and actually look at the mechanics of this, because the concealment isn't accidental. It's not just that the meaning of Amen drifted over time the way all language drifts. The concealment is structural. It's baked into the theological choices that were made at very specific historical moments by very specific people with very specific institutional interests. Here's what I mean. Amun, spelled A-M-U-N in the Egyptian, is a compound concept. The name itself encodes a paradox. Amun means the hidden one, the concealed one, the one whose nature cannot be directly perceived. But Amun was simultaneously considered the supreme source, the creative ground from which all other gods and all material reality emerged. Hidden, yes, but not absent. Concealed, yes, but not distant. This is a crucial distinction, and it's one that got lost in translation, not accidentally, but systematically. The Egyptian theological tradition held that Amun was immanent in creation while remaining transcendent to it. He was in the breath, in the wind, which the Egyptians associated with Amun specifically because wind is invisible but demonstrably present. You feel it, you see what it moves, but you cannot see the wind itself. That was Amun, the power you perceive through its effects, the presence you encounter through what it animates. Now hold that image and compare it to what Amen became in liturgical use. A closing word, a punctuation mark, a collective verbal signal that the prayer is finished. The hidden one, who animates all things from within, became the word you say when you're done. And I want to be precise about something here, because this is where I've seen people online oversimplify this into a kind of gotcha, as though the whole point is just that Christian churches unknowingly borrowed an Egyptian god's name, and that's the scandal. That's not actually the interesting part. That's the surface. The deeper layer is what the borrowing reveals about what was lost in the transition. The Egyptian Amen theology had a sophisticated inner life component. There were initiatory traditions within the Amen cult that moved practitioners from the external, ritual worship of the hidden one toward something more interior, toward a direct, unmediated encounter with the concealed ground. The hidden one was hidden in this framework not because he was far away, but because the perceiving apparatus of ordinary consciousness couldn't register what was right there. The concealment was an epistemological problem, not a geographical one. That distinction matters enormously. If the divine is far away, the correct response is to call out across the distance. If the divine is concealed within and beneath ordinary perception, the correct response is to change how you're perceiving. One produces petition, the other produces transformation. The Gnostic tradition, which was deeply familiar with Egyptian religious thought, given that Alexandria was the intellectual crossroads where these traditions met and mixed, carried this inner life component forward. The monad in Gnostic cosmology functions the way Amun does in Egyptian cosmology. It is the hidden source, the concealed ground, the light no eye can directly behold, as the Apocryphon of John puts it. But it is not external to you. It is the foundation you're standing on without knowing you're standing on it. I spent a significant stretch of time, I think it was about 3 weeks, working through the scholarship on Alexandrian religious syncretism. Specifically, how Egyptian theological frameworks moved into early Jewish Platonism, and from there into the various Christian and proto-Gnostic communities that formed in that same environment. And one thing that kept jumping out at me was how consistent the inner life structure was across all of these traditions, even as the surface vocabulary shifted. Hidden source, interior access, transformation of perception as the mechanism. That structure appears in Amun theology, in Philo of Alexandria's Jewish Platonism, in the Hermetic corpus, and then, emphatically, Mito in the Nag Hammadi texts. It's not a coincidence, it's a lineage. And what Orthodox Christianity did, what the councils and the bishops did, and I'm talking specifically about figures like Irenaeus of Lyon, writing around 180 CE, and Tertullian a little later, was aggressively sever that lineage. They kept the words, they kept Amen, they kept some of the ritual structures, but they stripped out the interiority, the initiatory dimension, the transformation of perception framework. What survived was petition across distance. What was suppressed was encounter at depth. And I personally think this is the most consequential religious edit in Western history. Not because it produced bad theology necessarily, but because it produced a widespread interior homelessness. Millions of people going through spiritual motions that point toward an encounter the tradition no longer had the tools to facilitate. That's my one editorial position on all of this, and I'll own it. The severance of the inner life component wasn't just a theological difference of opinion, it was a subtraction that left something genuinely missing. Now here's where it gets cosmically significant. Because the Gnostics didn't just recognize that something had been lost, they built a systematic alternative. And the architecture of that alternative is visible, if you know where to look, in the Nag Hammadi texts themselves. Before we continue, some of what I've learned simply never makes it onto YouTube. That's why I started the Gnostic newsletter, a free newsletter where I go deeper into esoteric Gnostic teachings, hidden wisdom, and the mysteries we don't share in these videos. And when you sign up, you'll receive a Gnostic guide to mastering reality as a welcome gift, completely free. You'll find it through the link in the description below or by scanning the QR code on your screen. I'll give you a moment to do that. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk, and I want to walk you through what that reconstruction actually looked like. Start with the Gospel of Philip. Discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, probably composed somewhere in the 3rd century CE, the Gospel of Philip is unusual among the Gnostic texts because it is explicitly preoccupied with the question of names and what names do. There's a passage that stopped me completely the first time I read it. Philip writes, and I'm giving you the sense of it rather than a word-for-word translation, that the names given to worldly things are profoundly deceptive because they divert attention from one reality to another. The name pulls you toward the label and away from the thing labeled. Philip then makes a further move. He argues that certain names, when properly understood, don't divert attention, they redirect it inward. They function as pointers toward the concealed source rather than substitutes for it. That's a remarkably precise diagnosis of exactly what happened to Amen. The name that was designed to redirect attention toward the hidden, concealed divine ground became a diversion, a label that substituted for the encounter it was originally gesturing toward. The trimorphic protanoia, a text I've come back to repeatedly because it is dense in the best possible way, takes this even further. Protanoia means first thought, and the text is structured as a first-person voice from the pleroma addressing the reader directly. The voice says, "I am the one who is hidden within luminous waters. I am the one who moves in all creatures. I am the life of my epinoia that dwells within every power." Notice what that structure does. It's not addressed to an external divine being. The divine is speaking to you from inside the structure of your own existence. The voice of the first thought is already there. You're not calling toward it. You're being called by it to recognize it. This is the Gnostic inversion of conventional prayer, where conventional liturgy addresses a divine being presumed to be external. The protanoia addresses you as though the divine interior is speaking through the text directly to your concealed recognition. Saying amen in that framework would mean something completely different. It wouldn't mean "I'm done" or "so be it" in the passive acceptance sense. It would be an invocation, a deliberate act of orienting consciousness toward the hidden one, the concealed source, the Amen ground that the tradition consistently locates at the foundation of your awareness rather than at a distance from it. Now, one viewer left a comment on my video about the monad call, the one titled, "I've called the monad every night for a year, here's what stopped happening." And this stopped me cold. They wrote, "The strangest part isn't what started happening, it's that I stopped needing the distance to feel something. Like the gap closed, and I didn't notice it closing until it was already closed." That's the protanoia dynamic in lived experience. The gap that conventional prayer presupposes, the distance between the petitioner and the divine, doesn't close through more vigorous petition. It closes through a shift in the quality of attention, through what the Gnostics would call gnosis, direct interior knowing, as distinguished from pistis, which is faith held across a distance towards something you cannot directly verify. The Pistis Sophia, one of the longer Gnostic texts, works through this distinction at considerable length. Pistis, faith, is presented not as worthless, but as a preliminary orientation, a directional compass. But the Sophia figure in the text, whose name literally means wisdom, has gone wrong not by losing faith, but by becoming so absorbed in her faith that she's forgotten it was always pointing towards something she was capable of directly encountering. Faith became a destination instead of a direction. That's the amen problem in cosmological form. When you say amen at the end of a prayer without any connection to the Egyptian Gnostic depth of what that name was reaching toward, you are doing what Sophia did in the text. You're treating the pointer as the destination. You're confusing the compass needle for the north it's indicating. The Gnostic reconstruction, and this is what I want you to actually hear, was not an attempt to abolish religious practice. It was an attempt to restore the interior dimension that practice was originally designed to facilitate. The hidden one was hidden. The encounter with the hidden one required a specific quality of turning, inward, attentive, recognizing, not a more eloquent form of calling across distance. So what actually happens when you stop saying amen the automatic way? When you break the liturgical habit long enough to actually sit with what the word is pointing toward? I can tell you what happened for me. About 2 years ago, and I want to be precise about what happened here, because I've seen people in this space oversell their experiences, and I don't want to do that. I was at a point in my own practice where I'd been reading through the Apocryphon of John for probably the 4th or 5th time. I'd read it before, annotated it, thought I understood the architecture of it. But this particular night, something was different. I'd been sitting with the opening description of the monad, that passage where the text says the monad is a monarchy with nothing above it, that it is ineffable, that no one was before it, that it dwells in pure light no eye can behold. And instead of reading that as a cosmological description of an external divine being, I let myself sit with the question, what in me is this pointing toward? I'm not claiming a mystical experience in any dramatic sense. I want to be clear about that. What happened was quieter than that, and, I would argue, more interesting. What happened was that the question didn't produce an answer. It produced a quality of attention, a particular kind of interior stillness that had a different texture than ordinary thinking about theological concepts. And then, almost involuntarily, I said amen. Not as a conclusion, not as a signal that I was done, but as a recognition. The hidden one, the concealed ground, not out there, here, at the foundation of the awareness that was doing the looking. Something shifted, not externally, internally. The way a radio locks onto a frequency after a long period of static. Not dramatic, just clear, signal where there had been noise. Now, here's what I want to connect that experience to, because personal anecdote without conceptual grounding is just a story. The Apocryphon of John describes the monad in terms that consistently resist external projection. The text doesn't say the monad is up there or out there. It says the monad is the one from whom everything proceeds. But that proceeding is an emanation, an outflowing, not a creation across distance. The monad doesn't make things and send them away. The monad expresses through things while remaining fully what it is. The wave metaphor works here. The wave is not separate from the ocean, even though the wave has distinct form and motion and height. The ocean hasn't gone anywhere. The ocean is precisely what the wave is made of. When you say amen with that cosmological architecture actually alive in your understanding, you're not signing off a communication to a distant authority. You're performing a recognition, an acknowledgement of the hidden ground that your awareness is already an expression of. That's a different gesture, completely different. Now, the Zostrianos, another Nag Hammadi text that doesn't get nearly enough attention, frames this in terms of what it calls standing. Not petition and waiting, standing. The practitioner in the text doesn't beg the divine source for access. The practitioner is instructed to stand in the divine light, to take up a posture of already belonging to the ground from which they came. The word for this in Greek, stasis, carries connotations of stability, of rootedness, of claiming a position rather than appealing for one. That is cosmologically opposite to how amen functions in liturgical petition. And here's the institutional problem with this. If your relationship to the divine source is one of standing, of already belonging, of interior recognition, then you don't need a mediating institution to manage your access. You don't need the structure of petition and response. You don't need a priest to interpret the divine reply. You are, in the Gnostic framework, already the divine expressing itself through the temporary form of your particular human consciousness. Can't exactly put a collection plate in front of someone's internal recognition. Just saying. Irenaeus of Lyon understood this completely. His attack on Gnostic teachers in the Adversus Heresies, written around 180 CE, is not primarily a theological refutation in the philosophical sense. It's a sociological alarm. He's not just saying these people are wrong about cosmology. He's saying these people are undermining the authority structure of the church. The hidden knowledge they claim direct access to bypasses the hierarchy. And a hierarchy that can be bypassed is a hierarchy that cannot survive. The suppression of the interiority framework wasn't purely about theological disagreement. It was about institutional preservation. When an institution attacks a teaching, not because it's theologically incoherent, but because it renders the institution itself optional, you're looking at a different kind of suppression. That's not heresy hunting. That's self-preservation. So what do you actually do with this? Because I know how this can go. The historical deconstruction lands, the etymology resonates, the Gnostic cosmological framework makes a kind of sense that surprises you, and then you're left sitting there with the question, okay, but what now? What does it look like in practice to relate to Amen, to the hidden one, as something other than a liturgical full stop? The Gnostic texts don't leave you hanging on this. They are, in their own layered and sometimes deliberately obscure way, deeply practical documents. The practice they point toward has a few consistent features across multiple texts, and I want to lay those out clearly. First, the turn inward. Every Gnostic text that deals with the encounter with the divine source, the monad, the Father, the hidden light, call it what you will across the varying vocabularies of different texts, describes the encounter as an interior movement rather than an exterior gesture. The Apocryphon of John frames it as the stirring of the epinoia, the divine thought, the interior spark that is already present in every human being but lies dormant until recognized. You don't travel toward it, you turn toward it. The direction changes, not the distance. I want to connect this to something I covered in my video. I wrote down every dream for 40 nights after the monad call, 3 kept repeating. What emerged in that experiment, and it surprised me more than it probably should have, was a consistent interior signature across the nights when the practice felt most alive. Not dramatic vision, not anything I'd want to oversell, but a quality of presence that was oriented inward rather than outward. Like consciousness becoming aware of what's underneath consciousness rather than reaching toward what's above it. That's the turn the Gnostic texts are pointing toward. Not up and out, down and in. Second, the recognition rather than the petition. This is the direct practical inversion of conventional prayer. In the prayer model, you are identifying a need, formulating a request, and directing that request toward a divine authority who will or will not respond. The entire posture is one of deficit. I lack something that you could provide. In the Gnostic recognition model, the move is fundamentally different. You are not identifying lack, you are identifying source. You are, deliberately and with full attention, remembering that the awareness in which all of your experience arises, including the experience of lack, is itself an expression of the divine ground. The monad is not the answer to your need. The monad is what you're already made of. The trimorphic protonoia states this with unusual directness. I am the movement that dwells in all. I am the one you have not known. It is I whom you sought. It is I whom you found. The text is not describing an encounter with an external being. It is describing the moment of interior recognition in which the practitioner realizes that what they were seeking was the awareness doing the seeking. That's not word games. That's a precise description of a specific interior event that contemplative practitioners across traditions, not just Gnostic ones, report with striking consistency. Third, the naming. And this brings us back to Amen. If the first move is the interior turn, and the second move is the recognition of source rather than the formulation of petition, then the third move is the naming, the deliberate use of the word that points toward the hidden one. Not as a closing word, not as a punctuation mark, as an invocation, as a compass needle that, when you actually use it as a compass, orients the whole quality of your attention toward what cannot be directly seen, but can be directly recognized. Amun, the hidden one, the concealed ground. You say it when you say it with this architecture alive in you, and you're not signing off a communication, you're performing a recognition. You're claiming not that your request has been submitted, but that you know, in the Gnostic sense of gnosis, direct interior knowing, what you are made of and what you are an expression of. The difference between those two gestures is not subtle. It is the difference between a person knocking on a door from outside and a person realizing they are already inside the building. The knocking can be urgent, sincere, and even beautiful. But if you are already inside, if the divine ground is already the medium of your awareness, then knocking is, at minimum, redundant. Now, this doesn't mean you stop. Practice is practice. Repetition has its function. The Gnostic communities that preserved these texts were not anti-ritual. They had elaborate ritual structures of their own. The point is not the abandonment of practice. The point is the quality of interiority you bring to it. The compass works when you know it's a compass. The name of the hidden one opens something when you actually understand what it's naming. That's what 2,000 years of liturgical habit compressed out of Amen. Not the word, the understanding behind it. The cosmological architecture that makes the word do what it was designed to do. So here is where everything we've covered collapses into a single point. Amen is not a sign-off. It is not punctuation at the end of a request. It is not the verbal equivalent of hitting send on a message addressed to somewhere outside of you. It is a declaration. It is a cosmological orientation. It is, if the people who originally understood it were correct, a statement about the nature of what you are and what reality is. And those people were not fringe mystics hiding in desert caves writing things nobody would read. The communities that transmitted these understandings were widespread. They were serious. They produced theologians who nearly shaped the institutional direction of Western Christianity. They were suppressed not because they were obviously wrong, but because they were structurally threatening. When you have a system built on the management of the relationship between human beings and the divine, built on the premise that this relationship requires institutional mediation, and then a teaching emerges that says, no, actually, the relationship is direct, interior, and already complete, you do not get a polite theological debate. You get Irenaeus. You get the council decisions. You get the bonfire. That's the tell, always. When a teaching is burned rather than simply refuted, you are looking at a teaching that someone with power was afraid of. I want to be direct about something before I close this out. I'm not arguing that you should abandon every form of religious practice you've built your life around. I'm not qualified to make that argument, and I'm not interested in making it. What I am saying, what I've spent several videos on this channel building toward, is that there is a difference between practicing something and understanding what you're practicing. Between saying a word and knowing what the word does. Amen, used as punctuation, does nothing. Or rather, it does the only thing that unconscious repetition ever does. It reinforces the groove. It deepens the habit. It makes the posture feel natural. And if the posture is supplication from a distance, you practice that. Daily. Thousands of times across a lifetime. Amen, understood as the Gnostic and deeper Hebraic traditions preserved it, as Amun, as the hidden one, as the name that points not outward to a distant authority, but inward to the unnameable source present at the base of your own awareness, does something categorically different. It reorients. Every time you use it. Not as belief, as recognition. I personally think this is the most consequential suppression in the entire history of Western religious language. More significant even than the arguments about the nature of Christ, or the canon debates about which texts survived. Because this one reached all the way into the daily practice of ordinary people. Every single prayer, every single ritual utterance. The inversion was embedded directly into the most repeated gesture in Western Christianity, quietly redirecting what should have been an act of self-recognition into an act of self-erasure. That doesn't happen by accident. I've been sitting with this research for months now. I want to be clear about that. This isn't something I assembled in a weekend. The threads that run through the Nag Hammadi library, through the Egyptian material on Amun-Ra, through the way the word functions in the Gospel of Philip against the way it functions in standard liturgy, I spent a long stretch of evenings tracking these connections across multiple source traditions. And what kept surfacing was the same pattern. A word that meant presence, immanence, the hidden that is also the nearest, reframed across centuries into a word that means agreement with a petition sent somewhere else. And once you see that inversion, you can't unsee it. If you've been watching this channel for a while, you know that's the thread running through all of it. Through the video on the archons, through the monad call series, through the night my wife did the monad call without any context and described the same interior architecture the texts describe. The same recognition keeps appearing from different angles. The tradition that was suppressed because it returned authority to the individual. Not permission, not access, not grace granted from outside, but the basic recognition that what you've been reaching toward has always been the same thing as what's doing the reaching. That is what Amen encoded, before encoding became erasure. So stop saying it automatically, or rather, say it differently. Say it like someone who knows what they're saying. Let it be a location rather than a closing. Let it name the hidden one, which is also the nearest one. Let it be a moment of recognition rather than a moment of submission. You were not given a word to seal a request. You were given a name to remind yourself of what you already are. Use it like that. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Talk. If this landed somewhere real for you, let me know by commenting, "I remembered the word." I read every one of those, and I want to know where this one hit you.